Today we're out here in the forest taking a look at the all-new and all-sexy Mazda CX-9. The CX-9 isn't just Mazda's largest crossover in America, it also should be looked at as the Mazda flagship product in America. This is the direct competitor to the Ford Explorer, the Toyota Highlander, the Honda Pilot, and even in top-end trims, the Acura MDX. The bold and unique front-end design is definitely the first thing you're going to notice about the CX-9. The overall theme is very similar to what we see in the current generation Mazda 6, but they've made things a lot edgier, a lot bolder, a lot stronger in the CX-9. The biggest difference is this grille right here. You can see this very large chrome surround that goes around the bottom portion of the grille. The top portion of the grille is actually body colored, but the whole grille itself appears to have actually been pushed out in front of the vehicle rather than more of a part of the front bumper like we see in the Mazda 6. As we see in other Mazda models, the CX-9 gets full LED headlamps, and we have LED fog lamps down here lower on the bumper as well, with another small chrome strip running right across the bottom. From this angle, you can really see what's going on with the front grille. We even have a light pipe going through that headlight that intersects right with that edge of the front grille. It's a little difficult to show on camera, but top-end models also get a light pipe right here on the bottom chrome portion of the grille to illuminate it at night. At 199.4 inches long, the new CX-9 is still one of the larger three-row crossovers in this segment. This is about 1 inch longer than the Nissan Pathfinder and 8 inches longer than a Toyota Highlander. It's obvious from the side profile that this is a three-row crossover because we have a roofline that stays relatively upright as we go towards the rear, although it does slope a little bit more than some. We have a moderately sized rear window right back here, and then we have this rakish rear glass, which is a little bit unusual in the three-row crossover segment. It does cut down on cargo practicality just a little bit behind the third-row seats. Where the CX-9 starts to differ from a lot of the mainstream competition is right here up front, because you'll notice this front axle is actually pushed a little bit further forward than we see in something like a Highlander or a Honda Pilot. That's because of the general engine design that we find in the CX-9. Now there are some downsides and some upsides. The upside is it gives us this very attractive side profile that reminds me a little bit of the Volvo XC90. On the downside, even though the CX-9 is actually a little bit larger than the Pathfinder, we have about 4 inches less legroom inside the vehicle than we find in the Pathfinder. The overall design and styling cues on the CX-9 are very similar to other Mazda models. Some people out there refer to that as the same sausage in different links design philosophy. However, not all manufacturers manage to convert that same general design to very different vehicles as well as Mazda does, because this is the same sort of design language that we see in the Mazda MX-5, the Mazda 3, Mazda 6, and the CX-5, and I think it actually works the best in the CX-9. We have this large chrome bar right here, very similar tail lamps to other Mazda models with this ring and the light pipe running right through it, the amber turn signal right in the center of that we see on the other side, and a backup lamp right here, tasteful chrome strip right below that, and dual exhaust tips right here at the bottom of the bumper. In my mind, the CX-9 is quite simply the most attractive crossover under $50,000. But I want to know what you think, so be sure and let me know down there in the comments section down below about the overall design and the look of the CX-9. In an unusual move for this segment, there is just one engine available under this hood. It's a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. It features variable valve timing as well as direct injection. Power comes in at 250 horsepower or 227 depending on the grade of gasoline you feed your engine. However, torque remains the same at a very diesel-like 310 pound-feet. The engine is mated only to a 6-speed automatic transmission and sends power to the front wheels by default, but there's an available all-wheel drive system as well. Combined fuel economy numbers are high for this segment, 23 miles per gallon in the all-wheel drive version that we're taking a look at right here, and 25 if you opt for the front-wheel drive model. Keep in mind these are 2016 numbers. We do expect these to alter, probably drop by 1 mile per gallon for the 2017 cycle. If you're thinking to yourself that the power and torque figures from this engine are very diesel-like, then you're right. Mazda actually was very specific in designing this engine to give you that kind of experience. They deliberately targeted high torque and a moderate amount of horsepower to help improve fuel economy and improve real-world driving performance. Now on the downside, actual 0 to 60 times, as we'll discuss later, are definitely lower than some of the V6 competitors. However, fuel economy is significantly higher. Front seat comfort comes in at 8 out of 10 points. I found these seats very comfortable, but I do have to deduct a few points because they're not quite as adjustable as some of the other entries in this segment. We have two-way adjustable lumbar support in this top-end trim, but the seat only has 8 ways of motion, so the front of the seat does not come up and down independently of the rear of the seat. We do, however, have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion. These seats are a little bit less adjustable in terms of the range of motion than we see in other top-end trims of mainstream crossovers, and they're certainly less adjustable than luxury or near luxury crossovers like we see in the Acura MDX or perhaps the Volvo XC90. Second row comfort comes in at 10 out of 10 points. These are some very comfortable second row seats. They're also nice and adjustable. So the second row slides forward and backward to help you apportion the space between the second row and the third row a little bit more equitably. And the second row also reclines. And the recline mechanism happens nice and low in the seat to give the seat a very natural angle in terms of the seat back. Moving over to the middle seat, I have a decent amount of legroom and a decent amount of headroom, even though we are in the model with the optional sunroof. Moving all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, I had this front passenger seat all the way back in its tracks with a 6'5" person up front, and I still have about 2 inches of legroom left. Third row comfort tends to be a function of combined legroom, especially in 3-row vehicles where the second row is adjustable and slides forwards and backwards. In the CX-9, we find a little bit less legroom than we see in a Nissan Pathfinder. The Pathfinder is one of the larger entries in this particular segment, but we definitely have more than something like a Toyota Highlander or a Kia Sorento. Sitting back here in the third row with this middle seat all the way back in its tracks at a comfortable angle, I have about ½ an inch of legroom left. Headroom is definitely something that's limited back here, and you will find more in the Pathfinder or the Honda Pilot, but we have just about as much leg support because the seats in all these 3-row crossovers are pretty close to the floor. As we see with most 3-row crossovers, the majority of the room inside the CX-9 is devoted to passenger capacity, not cargo capacity. However, we do have a little bit more room behind the third row than we find in certain luxury crossovers like the Acura MDX. I was able to fit 2 of these 24-inch roller bags in this upright position right back here. I was unable to fit a third bag back here because you cannot put them in this position and still have the rear hatch close. This is possible in the CX-9 because the load floor lifts up and out of the way to give us access to a little bit more storage space between the cargo area and the spare tire that is underneath it. You can also completely remove it from the vehicle. If you fold the third row flat, you can fit 8 of these 24-inch roller bags back here because we find about the same kind of room behind the second row as you find in your average large 2-row crossover like a Ford Edge or a Lexus RX 350. As we take a look around this interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end trim. You can see from this angle that we have those window shades on the second row, height-adjustable seatbelts for both the driver and the front passenger, and 2-way adjustable headrests. Because we're in the top-end trim, we have perforated leather in the center of the seat. We have those black inserts and black piping as well. Although these seats are perforated, they're not ventilated, they're just heated. The front doors are made of a majority of soft-touch plastic. Pretty much everything above the armrest here is a soft-touch material, this brown insert, as well as this area right here around this LED ambient lighting. And we have real wood trim right here around the window switches. Hard plastics are found lower on the door near the speaker grille and this storage bin. As you'd expect out of a flagship model, the parts quality on the dashboard is higher than we see in most other Mazda models. We have soft-touch injection molded plastics for both the black portion and the brown portion of the dashboard, real aluminum trim right here, and then we have a moderately sized glove compartment. It is a bin style, and I was able to fit an iPad inside. Between the front seats, we find 2 large cup holders, and then this softly padded center armrest that opens in sort of a bifold fashion. Each side opens independently of one another. We have a moderate amount of storage space here. You can see I can put a wallet or something along those lines inside. We have the SD card for the navigation database, auxiliary input, and 2 USB inputs. Heads-up displays are notoriously to film, but we do have one of the best heads-up displays in any vehicle, regardless of the category here in the new CX-9. It is configurable, so we can turn this tachometer on or off. We have digital speedometer, turn-by-turn directions, the status of our radar adaptive cruise control, and interestingly enough, the status of the blind spot monitoring system as well. So you'll actually have a little indication right sort of by the 0 and the 8 on this scale that something is in your blind spot. One thing worth noting is that if you're a taller driver, you may have difficulties using the system, because if I move the camera up to just hair above my eye level at 6 feet tall, the top of the screen is cut off. In fact, even if I sit up nice and straight in the driver's seat in the CX-9, some of that display is cut off. The instrument cluster is similar to what we see in other Mazda models. We have a tachometer on the left and a large central speedometer. On the right side, we see a new gauge for Mazda, and this is a color LCD. This gives us things like our trip computer A and B, as well as an instant fuel economy gauge. We have an engine temperature gauge and a fuel gauge below this screen as well. You can also see your service due, navigation instructions, the status of our safety systems like the lane keeping assistance system or the distance between you and the car in front of you, and of course we go back to the trip computer right there. The steering wheel is very similar to other Mazda models. We have sport grips up top, and it is a round design with a round central airbag. You'll find the controls for the infotainment system over here on the left, volume up, down, with a voice command button in the middle, info button right in the middle here that changes what that multifunction display does. On either side of that, we have track up and down, and then we have dedicated phone hang-up and pickup buttons for the Bluetooth phone integration. On the right side of the steering wheel, we find the buttons for the cruise control system. Because we have the radar adaptive cruise control in this model, we have a distance increase or decrease button that shows not only in this multifunction display, but also in the heads-up display, speed up, down, and then we have cancel off, and then a mode button to engage or disengage the cruise control system and switch between the radar adaptive and regular modes. Some of you ask why we bother to test a vehicle for a full week after we've already driven it at a launch event. The reason is that the scores aren't always the same. Acceleration times vary based on where the launch event is versus out here on my own home turf and my own home test track, and that means that it's difficult to compare one vehicle to the other because the other vehicles have been tested here. The other reason, of course, is that oftentimes we're driving pre-production vehicles at launch events, and the 0 to 60 performance times can oftentimes be slower than you would normally expect because the engines haven't been completely tuned for final production yet. The 0 to 60 score in the CX-9 is one example. We scored 7.9 seconds 0 to 60 the last time we tested this vehicle. On our own home test track, it came in at 7.4. Well, that is still not speedy for this segment. It is really only half a second slower than a Pathfinder or a Sorento V6. It is, however, 3/4 of a second slower than some versions of the Honda Pilot and a full second slower than the Ford Explorer with the 3.5-liter turbo. On the flip side, however, this is nearly identical to the Highlander V6, which is a very large volume model in this particular segment, and it's about half a second faster than the Ford Explorer with the 2.3-liter turbocharged engine. Thanks to the exceptionally wide tires that we have on this top-end trim CX-9, this went from 60 to 0 in 125 feet, which is absolutely excellent for the mainstream crossover segment. There are very few crossovers that will stop shorter than this, and even fewer that will stop shorter for about the same amount of money. In addition to delivering a short stopping distance, the CX-9 also performs very well in terms of brake fade resistance and overall braking feel. This does not feel squirrely like some of the large crossovers can. As you'd expect from Mazda, handling is absolutely excellent. The light curb weight and the wide tires give us very, very good grip in the CX-9 compared to the average entry in this segment. In addition to excellent grip, the CX-9 also gives us excellent feel. We get more steering feedback in the CX-9 than any other three-row crossover in the mainstream segment. The CX-9 even delivers better steering feedback than some of the large three-row crossovers like the Audi Q7 or the Acura MDX. Mazda has spent a great deal of time tuning their front-wheel drive suspensions and steering racks in order to try and transmit some feedback back to the driver, even though this does have an electric power steering system just like the other three-row crossovers out there. Now, the CX-9 does not have the same kind of balance or grip that we see in certain versions of the Dodge Durango. The Dodge Durango is the only rear-wheel drive entry in this particular segment. It also has a near-perfect 50-50 weight balance if you get the V6 engine. That results in a very, very dynamic and very nimble three-row crossover, even though the Durango is a very, very large crossover. Especially when you floor the car around a corner like this, the Dodge Durango will have a very rear-wheel drive dynamic. The CX-9 feels more like the average three-row crossover. That's one of the differences between this and the Acura MDX, for instance. The Acura MDX, which could be seen as a competitor to this top-end trim CX-9, has a torque vectoring rear axle, and it can send 70% of the power to the rear even without wheel slip. The CX-9 requires wheel slip in order to send more than 50% of the power to the rear wheels. So this is going to feel very well balanced for a mainstream three-row crossover, but the Acura MDX is going to feel just a little bit more nimble if you get the all-wheel drive version. If you get the front-wheel drive version of each, then actually the CX-9 takes the cake, because the MDX is a little bit heavier up front because of that V6 engine. It just doesn't feel quite as nimble out on the road. The steering feedback that we get in the CX-9 really helps this out as well. So all-wheel drive in the MDX, superior to the CX-9. Front-wheel drive in the CX-9, I'd actually say is superior to the MDX. The CX-9 suspension is firmer than certain versions of the Explorer or the Highlander, but this suspension is not as firm as sports luxury crossovers like certain versions of the BMW X5. The rear suspensions in many large crossovers can feel a little unsettled over broken pavement in the corners, but that's not going on in the CX-9. This has a definitely more planted feel. At 50 miles an hour, we scored 70 decibels in this cabin, which is actually half a decibel louder than when we tested this at the launch event. The road surface likely is the reason for that. We do test all of our vehicles on the same road surface, so when we're out at a launch event and we're testing it on a different road surface, those numbers can vary. Either way you slice it, this is still very good for this segment, and I'm going to give it an A. When it comes to fuel economy, I'm going to give the CX-9 a B+. We've been averaging 20.5 miles per gallon over about 500 miles of very mixed driving. The CX-9 scores very well in this segment, but there are entries that are better. So for instance, the 4-cylinder or the hybrid versions of the Toyota Highlander, they're going to give you slightly better fuel economy. You can actually get very similar fuel economy in the Nissan Pathfinder with its V6 engine and the continuously variable transmission in real-world driving. Although the EPA says the CX-9 will give you better fuel economy than the Pathfinder, in real-world driving they were actually fairly similar. Some people may be disappointed in the CX-9's performance, and I have to admit that if Mazda made a Mazda Speed CX-9 and gave this about 300 horsepower, that is the version that I would recommend. However, even with just 250 horsepower under the hood, this is easily the most fun entry in this segment outside the Dodge Durango or the Ford Explorer Sport. The Dodge Durango has an excellent weight balance, but it's going to be an awful lot thirstier. The Ford Explorer Sport is definitely faster 0 to 60, but it doesn't feel quite as engaging in the corners. You do give up an awful lot of feel in order to get that improved performance in the Explorer Sport. The Explorer Sport and the V8 Dodge Durango are also going to be an awful lot thirstier than the CX-9 no matter how hard you drive this Mazda. Mazda has priced the all-new CX-9 very aggressively. It starts at $31,520. Now that is obviously a little bit higher than some of the competition, but the aggressive pricing is all about standard equipment for the CX-9. The base sport trim includes things like LED headlamps, tri-zone automatic climate control, and the 7-inch touchscreen infotainment system standard. But this is Mazda, of course, and so we have some standard performance features as well. The turbocharged engine is, of course, standard, but also 18-inch 255 width tires are standard. These are the widest standard tires in the mainstream crossover segment, regardless of size. As good of a deal as the base trim is, I actually think that one step up into the touring trim is an even better value, because they swap out that 7-inch touchscreen infotainment system for an 8-inch model, and remember that Mazda allows you to add factory navigation software to any of their touchscreen infotainment systems for a very small fee. Grand Touring gets a little bit more expensive, but it steps up the equipment level even further with niceties like the factory navigation software, radar adaptive cruise control, the lane keeping assistance with the autonomous braking system, and of course the heads-up display. The heads-up display that we're seeing in the CX-9 seems to be a new direction for Mazda, because the 2017 Mazda 3 no longer uses that fold-up plastic heads-up display. It actually uses the full-color one that we find in the Grand Touring CX-9. The signature all-wheel drive trim of the CX-9 is a little interesting, because Mazda hasn't really tried to compete in the near-luxury segment until now. The signature trim gets you Nappa leather upholstery, which is the higher grade of leather that we typically find in luxury cars. It also has real wood trim, and that's how you get the accent lighting on the Mazda grille up front. Not only does the CX-9 come very well equipped for its base price, it actually has one of the lower base prices in this segment. The Ford Explorer starts at $31,660, which is a little bit more expensive, and you don't get the turbocharged engine for that base price. Toyota's Highlander starts at $34,500 essentially for the 2016 model year. We don't know what the 2017 will be priced like. However, we do know that the 4-cylinder engine is still going to be standard. And it's not a turbocharged 4-cylinder like we find in the Mazda. It's a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder that has significantly lower performance figures. The Honda Pilot seems like a good deal at just over $30,000. However, the level of standard equipment is not as high as we find in the Mazda, even though it does have that V6 engine standard. The only other vehicle in this segment that can really compete head-on in terms of value is the Hyundai Santa Fe. Not only is the Santa Fe a little bit less expensive than the Mazda CX-9, but the amount of standard equipment that we find in the Santa Fe is very impressive. Mazda has made a big deal about the fuel efficiency of the new CX-9. Now keep in mind we don't know what the 2017 fuel economy numbers will be like on the Mazda because they haven't released them yet, and most vehicles have suffered a 1 to 2 mile per gallon drop. However, even if the fuel economy in the base CX-9 drops from 24 to 23 miles per gallon for 2017, it's still going to be one of the more efficient 3-row crossovers. The Ford Explorer is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, not only because Ford sells so many, but because the Explorer comes in so many different varieties. We have naturally aspirated V6 versions of the Explorer, we have twin-turbo V6 versions of the Explorer, we have 4-cylinder turbo versions of the Explorer. The Explorer spans from a very basic utilitarian 3-row crossover on up to a near-luxury competitor, and there's also that twin-turbo Sport model, which is designed to compete with the V8 version of the Dodge Durango on the sporty end of this segment. Thanks to the very space-efficient design that we see in the Explorer, it is the larger vehicle on the inside. We get more cargo room in the back, a more practically shaped cargo area. We also get slightly more comfortable second and third row seats. When it comes to performance, the Explorer and the CX-9 address this very differently. The Mazda CX-9 is going to be the better handling vehicle in base form. I think it also is the better feeling vehicle in any form. However, if you get the Ford Explorer Sport, it will actually hold the road a little bit better than the Mazda CX-9, and it will definitely go from 0 to 60 faster than the CX-9. In fact, most versions of the Explorer will actually be faster 0 to 60 than the Mazda. When it comes to value, there's absolutely no question. The Mazda CX-9 gives you more gadgets, more features, and better handling for a lower sticker price. The acceleration really is the only caveat there. The acceleration in the CX-9 is definitely slower than the base V6 in the Explorer. For 2017, Toyota sent the Highlander in for some cosmetic surgery. It got a new front end, a tweaked back end, and a very lightly tweaked interior. But they also made some major changes to the configuration in the base trim, as well as under the hood. Although the basics of the vehicle have not changed, we now get an all-new 8-speed automatic transmission under the hood of the Highlander that improves fuel economy and improves performance with the V6 engine. It actually means that the V6 Highlander is now more fuel efficient in real-world driving than the base 4-cylinder engine in the Highlander. Another interesting twist is that Toyota is making their Safety Sense P package standard in the Highlander, just like we saw in the Corolla. That means it gets radar adaptive cruise control, autonomous braking, with pedestrian detection that will actually detect pedestrians and other cars and attempt to keep you from hitting them. It also includes lane keeping assistance and automatic high beams. That's all standard even in the base model of the Highlander, which is a little bit less expensive than the CX-9. Although pricing is quite low in the base Highlander model, you have to keep in mind that the Highlander does not start with a V6 engine. If you want the V6, and therefore you want performance that's roughly similar to the CX-9, it is going to be a little bit faster 0 to 60, that will set you back $32,015. Even though the Toyota has that standard radar adaptive cruise control package, you'll actually find more standard equipment in the Mazda than in the Toyota. On the flip side, if you're looking for a practically sized 8-passenger crossover, the Highlander is one of the few options because the Highlander is a little bit shorter, it's a little bit easier to park than the CX-9, but it actually seats one more person. Next up, we have the Honda Pilot, which was recently completely redesigned, and there are actually two different drivetrains under the hood. Both of them use the same V6 engine, but the top-end trims of the Pilot use the new ZF 9-speed automatic transmission that we see in certain Acura models as well as Chrysler and Jeep models. A lot of people dislike the way that 9-speed automatic shifts, so it may not necessarily be a pro over there on the top-end trims of the Pilot. It actually may be a con for some shoppers. The way the transmission shifts is not as smooth as the Honda 6-speed that we see in the lower-end trims, but it does improve real-world fuel economy, and it does improve acceleration by a great deal. If you get the 9-speed automatic transmission in the Honda Pilot, it is significantly faster 0 to 60 than the CX-9. Although the Pilot is not going to handle quite as well, even though the Pilot does have an optional torque vectoring all-wheel drive system on the rear axle. That means the Pilot is going to feel a little bit more nimble than the average entry in this segment, but it's not going to feel quite as nimble as the CX-9. Like the Toyota Highlander, the Pilot is one of the few entries in this segment that offers an 8-seat model. Although you should keep in mind that the 8-passenger configuration is not available in every trim of the Pilot. The Pilot continues to be very well priced, however, when you take a look at the standard feature content that we find in the CX-9, like the standard LED headlamps, the standard wide tires, standard 3-zone climate control, etc., you'll find more standard equipment in the Mazda than you will in the Pilot at that low base price, although it will still cost you just a little bit more if all you're shopping for is a base entry. At $30,800, the Hyundai Santa Fe is a very, very good buy in this particular segment, and it's no surprise that Hyundai is selling more Santa Fe's than they have in the past. The Santa Fe not only has a high level of standard equipment that competes very well with the Mazda CX-9, but it also has the longest standard warranty in this segment. When you start comparing feature for feature and you factor in the standard LED headlamps, wider tires, etc. on the Mazda, the long standard warranty on the Santa Fe, and you actually take a look at them, the prices end up evening out, but the Santa Fe is still going to be a little bit less expensive. Although Mazda's reliability has been improving, I do expect the Santa Fe to be a little bit more reliable than the CX-9 in real-world driving. The Santa Fe is also going to be a little bit quicker 0 to 60 thanks to its standard V6 engine. The closely related Kia Sorento is our top-rated mid-size three-row crossover for 2016 and 2017, but you do need to keep in mind that the Sorento is one of the smaller three-row crossovers. It is a little bit shorter than the Toyota Highlander, and it is obvious in the third row and in the cargo area behind the third row. So if you're looking for a vehicle with more third-row legroom, more third-row headroom, and more cargo room behind the third row, the Sorento is not going to be the best option for you. If, however, you're looking for a vehicle with an emergency third row or an occasional use third row for someone like your mother-in-law or those naughty children, then the Sorento is going to be an excellent option. It's very well priced at $30,385 for the model with the third row. The Sorento is a little unusual in this segment in that it is offered in two-row and three-row versions. The two-row version of the Sorento is not really a Mazda CX-5 competitor because it is the size of a three-row crossover, except that they delete that third-row seat. So you can think of it more of a Ford Edge or perhaps even a Lexus RX 350 sized crossover. Lastly, we have the Acura MDX, because Mazda was fairly clear that they're definitely targeting near-luxury shoppers with their top-end trim of the CX-9. The biggest immediate difference between the MDX and the CX-9 is the price tag. The CX-9 is considerably less expensive than a comparably equipped MDX, and the MDX is one of the better values in that luxury or near-luxury crossover segment. It is significantly less expensive than an Audi Q7 or a Volvo XC90. Handling is the other big difference between the MDX and the CX-9, and this is kind of an interesting twist. Because if you compare front-wheel drive versions of the CX-9 to front-wheel drive versions of the MDX, I would take the CX-9 in terms of handling ability and handling feel. It has a very solid planted feel to it. We get more feedback from the steering wheel. It's just more fun to drive than the MDX. If, however, you're talking about all-wheel drive versions, then I would take the MDX over the CX-9. The steering is not any better in the all-wheel drive version of the MDX, but the grip and the overall road feel certainly is. The big difference between the all-wheel drive and the front-wheel drive version of the MDX is the super handling all-wheel drive system. It has a torque vectoring rear axle, and super handling all-wheel drive can actually give the MDX a rear power bias. So when you're driving the MDX hard out on your favorite winding mountain road, it will actually feel more like a rear-wheel drive BMW X5 than a front-wheel drive CX-9. It is kind of an interesting twist. Of course, you will pay for that extra handling ability in the MDX because it's going to be significantly more than the CX-9. So if my money were on the line, I would probably buy the CX-9 before any version of the MDX, even comparing all-wheel drive model to all-wheel drive model, because I'm willing to give up some of that extra handling ability for some of the value that we see in the CX-9. When it comes to my final word, the Kia Sorento is still my top pick for three-row crossovers, largely because I don't need a very large third row. If you need a larger third row, then the CX-9 is my favorite option, hands down. The Honda Pilot may be faster 0 to 60, the Toyota Highlander may be more fuel efficient in its hybrid form, it also may have that 8th seat and greater reliability than the Mazda, but none of those are going to be quite as much fun as the Mazda. The Explorer Sport and the Durango RT are unquestionably fun, large three-row crossovers out on your favorite winding mountain road. However, they don't have that same direct, engaging feel that we see in the CX-9, and I think that both of those vehicles are a little bit more compromised than the CX-9. They're also going to be more expensive than the Mazda. And there you have it. If you're looking for a small three-row crossover, head over to the Kia dealer. If you're looking for a large three-row crossover, head to the Mazda dealer. If you're looking for an 8-seat vehicle, I would actually suggest a full-size van. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes. Be sure and comment on this video down there in the comment section down below. Hit that subscribe button down there. Check out the related videos on the side of the screen. If you want to support this channel, you can also find us over at patreon.com. I'll see you next week.